Welcome to Emergence Magazine's podcast. I'm Emmanuel Vaughn Lee, host of this show and executive editor of Emergence Magazine, located on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok people in present-day Marin County. Each week, we feature interviews, stories, poetry, and author-narrated essays exploring the threads connecting ecology, culture, and spirituality. One of the things we've been thinking about a lot at Emergence is how we can reimagine our most foundational structures to sow a future different from the one of ecological disintegration we're sailing towards. If you're familiar with the work of research scientist Monica Gagliano, you'll know that she offers a real example of what this reimagining and rebuilding of knowledge and scientific structures can look like. She is renowned for her pioneering work in plant communication and cognition, and models how we can radically bridge the rigor of Western scientific methodology with the deeply human and also spiritual act of listening to plants. And I mean this quite literally. For many years now, Monica's work and experiments have been directly informed by interactions she has had with plants and the knowledge they have shared with her through dreams, conversations, sensations, and visions. And while her work currently sits right on the precipice of what is accepted within the temple of modern Western science, what I find most compelling about her work is she demonstrates how being open, attentive, and approaching the earth with an attitude of humility doesn't make Western science weaker. It can actually expand what we're able to see, feel, and understand. To me, this feels radical, and a space where true emergence can take place, where we seed the new ways of being and knowing that we so desperately need. In this conversation, I talk with Monica about how her work has evolved as she has nurtured a relationship of reciprocity, trust, and exchange with the plants she studies, reminding us that connecting with plants is within our basic human capacity and something we have been doing for millennia. She talks to me about the importance of surrendering our long-held biases about intelligence and our place in the world, and the possibilities that exist in spaces of profound unknowing. She shares stories about a remarkable experiment in the Dolomites, where a forest synchronized electrical signals during a solar eclipse, and we delve into the mystical experiences and communications with trees and plants that is threaded throughout her work. Monica, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for having me.
So I just finished your book, Thus Spoke the Plant, which details how your work in plant cognitive ecology is directly shaped by knowledge imparted through your interactions and dialogues with plants, that they communicate to you in dreams and visions and conversations, as well as via more traditional forms of scientific experiments. So I wonder, to begin our conversation, if you can offer an introduction to how these experiences shape your work.
I feel that most people actually have these experiences. I just happen to be one that is having these experiences and is also a scientist, and so I can translate those experiences in a language, that one of Western science, that makes sense to people who do not think they have these experiences, if it makes sense.
Right.
So connecting with the more than human world, and plants obviously are part of that more than human, it's a very basic human capacity. Like, if you're human, you qualify. And this connectedness is sometimes expressed in, as you mentioned, you might have a dream, or you might have a sensation, or a physical sensation, or an emotional response to something that, if you pay attention, you might recognize is coming from your garden, for example, or from a forest while you're just going for a stroll. And my work emerges simply from these very common experiences, as I said, then translated in a more structured world, which is that of Western science. And And I guess if you go down that rabbit hole deep enough, you find out that these others are quite willing to collaborate, not just be heard, but literally having a say that can together create something different, something new. So I'm not a plant biologist, for example. I was an animal ecologist, and I didn't know anything about plants. And actually, to be honest, I was pretty plant blind, which means they're in the background, they are the background, and
Right.
I don't really know their names, I don't really know what they do, and they're pretty, especially when they flower, but that's about it, right? Which is what most plant blind people would perceive plants to be.
Right.
And so the plants decided it was time for me to stop being blind and make their presence really felt in my life and in my work. But because I wasn't coming from there as a trained scientist, I approached them differently. And so I wasn't afraid to ask questions that we are normally asking of animals. Questions of how do they learn? Do they learn? Do they remember? How long they do remember for? What do they remember? Or how do they communicate? What do they use for communication? Are they listening? Are they smelling? Are they watching? What are they doing? So all of these questions that if you think of any animals would be like, oh yeah, of course, we've been asking those questions for a long time of animals. Then you apply it to a different kingdom, which normally is underestimated for this capacity. Then suddenly those questions seem so controversial, but
Right.
actually they're just questions that we haven't asked.
I mean, you said they're controversial, and if you were asking those questions in the context of animals, it might be different. But
Yeah.
you are kind of pushing boundaries within the scientific establishment by relating to plants like that, or considering them to have intelligence in a way
Yeah.
that most established scientific schools would say no, that's not allowed. But the irony here is that although this is cutting edge, I guess what you're doing, it's actually really not cutting edge at all, because human
No.
beings have been working with and learning from plants since time immemorial. Just only recently in the Western modern world have we stopped doing so.
That's right. In a way, this is like the quintessential form of colonialized mind.
Right.
It's only for the last few hundreds of years that we have decided, literally, that we need to catalog and observe in a detached way and describe it systematically and all of that, which then it becomes the foundation of botany and much of Western science. And the detachment from the other, it's a fundamental element for this new science, which now we consider science or modern science, as we call it sometimes. But you're totally right. I mean, all of my work, in fact, is inspired by indigenous spaces where this kind of knowing, it's not even discussed because it's so obvious and so everyday, so in a way so simple that you would think why would we even talk about this? It's of course I'm talking to those trees or the land or whatever, the river, if I need to work with them or if I need to pass through that if I need to walk up that mountain, I'm going to ask permission before I do.
Right.
And of course the mountain is going to grant it or not, and I have to listen because otherwise things will happen. And so this kind of posture, this way of moving in the world, I think it's been as a species, it's been the majority of our time.
Right.
It's been that posture. And it's only more recently, as I said, a few hundred years of nope, we're not doing it that way anymore. And the amazing thing about this Western or Eurocentric approach is that it has managed to spread this idea as a dominant paradigm across the world. And then now we call it colonialism because literally it's been trying to suppress other versions of reality to confirm its dominant version. And but it's just one version of reality, as it's always been. And so I think it's important for us as the practitioners who are within that system of, in this case, Western science, but it could be just a standard as well as Western thought. I think it's our responsibility to question it all the time and to
Right.
see, does it actually stand? Is this the only way to see? Is this the only way to think about things? Because nothing changes if we don't question.
Right. Right. Well, you perform experiments within what you could call a traditional Western scientific approach, but some of these experiments, and you describe this in the book, have been, I guess, instructed to you by the plants themselves, how to, I guess, perform an experiment that would prove something that the plant already knows.
That's right.
Tell me about this.
I want to preamble that when this was happening for me, I really thought I was going crazy too. And so I'm aware of how crazy this sounds. And yet, this is what has been happening. And now I've been approaching all of my work like this. And so, but I guess you're referring to one particular set of experiments with peas.
Right.
I was in the Amazon working with a big tree and following some very scientific, by the way, methodology from the indigenous approaches there and with plants. And I was not expecting, I didn't go there thinking like, now I'm going to go and the plants are going to give me some experimental instructions to do my science. Nothing at all. It was more like a personal exploration. I just wanted to learn more about what is this thing that they talk about, that, that we can connect with these others that are so alien to us because they're so different, and at least on the surface. And so that was my approach. And then, almost out of the blue, but then if you know the practice, you realize it wasn't out of the blue at all. That's how they do it. But to me, it felt like out of the blue. I found myself one morning keeping my diary, which I always keep every day when I'm traveling, especially when I'm doing this kind of experiments or practices. And I felt like someone was dictating and making me draw things that at first I didn't know, what is this? What am I doing? And then as the more it appeared and the more details appeared, like they were like literally the size of the pipes that I needed to use, and do it this way, not that way. And by the way, if you ask this question, you need to use this plant, not that plant. And I was like, what's going on? And then of course, when I had it all in front of me, I was just staring at it thinking, this is an experiment. They just gave me instructions how to do my job. So then the real madness happened not so much in the Amazon, but when I get back to Australia and I went to the lab and I set it up according to what I was instructed. And I ran this experiment that for 2 weeks was piloting, basically, so testing and checking things were working. And after 2 weeks, I came to the conclusion, okay, I'm just being an idiot. This is not working. What was I thinking that a plant now gave me instruction on how to do my work? And there was that one moment, which I think all of us, we have these moments in our lives when a little split second changes everything. And we could have gone one way and instead we got kind of pushed some other way. And that was one of those moments because I was about to dismantle everything, thinking like, wow, what was I thinking, really? And probably I am losing my mind. And then something, because the experiment was running complete darkness. The only little lights that were there were like little blue lights that were used for the experiment itself. And so I was in complete darkness, this cold room, and these blue little lights in the room, and that's it. And I was about to just switch everything on, dismantle everything, and end of the experiment. It didn't work. What an idiot. And instead, something stopped me. And there was this kind of internal voice that invited me to slow down, wait, and look again. And so I did. And I don't know what happened because I cannot really explain it even to myself, but I know that I suddenly saw something right there that I couldn't see until that moment about my plants and what the plants were doing. And they had been doing precisely what I was kind of testing and hoping they would do for 2 weeks. It's just that my own perception and my own preconceived ideas through training and through expectations didn't even allow me to see what was actually happening right in front of my eyes. And so I don't know what that moment of, I call it the intervention, was, but definitely something happened that in that moment I learned 2 things, and probably much more, but those 2 that I am aware of very clearly. One, that I don't know anything about what I'm doing. And so I am literally learning as the experiment in this case is happening. So I'm not the one that knows what's going on. I'm the one that is participating in what's going on. And so that was the total breakdown of the famous objective observer. It's like, I am totally part of this experiment. I've been kind of roped in. And without me, this is not happening. But not just because I have the physical hands that can make it happen, but also because I am the experiment with the plants.
Right.
And the other thing that I learned, which was really important for my little self, because this is not an easy path as an academic, as a woman in academia, in science. And it can be very lonely, and there are still plenty of, I would say, bullying and aggressive behavior towards something that can be so different, as we often do. You know, we don't like things that are different. We want them, but then we don't like them when they arrive. And in that moment, I realized it really gave me this sense of like, oh, wow. My colleagues, those ones that attack me and tell me that what I'm doing, I shouldn't be doing, that what is this stuff, you know, all of those behavior, which are a fear of the new, I was one of them just 5 seconds ago. Like, they cannot see, just as I couldn't see 5 seconds ago. And now, just because I've been given the privilege of seeing something else, suddenly I get it. And so it gave me this feeling of like, oh, wow, they're attacking me because literally they cannot see what I'm pointing at. And so I'm pointing, they see nothing, and they tell me, like, what's wrong with you? While I'm pointing, and I see something, and I was like, what do you mean? Don't you see? And no, the answer is like, no, I don't see. That's why I feel threatened, because you're pointing at something that I'm feeling I'm supposed to know, but I don't. I'm supposed to see, and I don't see. And but I think then, you know, I guess we find a little bit of consolation when we look at the history of science and how this has been the case for every single piece of new science that has emerged. I mean, including Darwin himself. He was so paranoid about his work coming out, and, you know, he was very cautious. And of course, he got a lot of backlash for what he said, because at the time he was like, well, can you prove it? And he's like, no, I can't even prove it. It's a theory. And it took a long time for that theory, a beautiful idea, to then become something that's like, oh, actually, yep, now we can see, you know, we have the fossil records and we have this and that, and we can put it together, and yeah, it makes sense. But this is the case of much of science. Yeah. So I kind of feel like, okay, this is how it goes. And so maybe I am doing something that is really contributing, and if that's the case, it's all good. It's worth it.
You know, it seems, you know, from reading about your work that some of your experiments, and you just described this, you know, they often reveal more about the human than the plant, in that they underscore our embedded conditioning around intelligence, our relationship to the more than human, our limits of our own imaginations, really. And I love that you describe plants as teachers, and perhaps that is partly why they help reveal ourselves to ourselves. And, you know, they've always done this, really, being teachers and reveal ourselves to ourselves when you look at traditional ecological knowledge. But as we said earlier, this has shifted. And you suggest that in order to move forward in our relationship with plants, we need to surrender a lot of our biases about the world, beyond just science and how Western modern science practices traditional forms of experiments or whether things are intelligent or not. There are larger biases we have to surrender.
Yeah.
Talk to me about this.
Well, where to start? The first one, I guess, and again, it seems so trivial to even say it because we actually already know all of this. So I'm not saying anything new. And I think most of the things that we speak of have been already said so many times in general. And we just, I guess we just need to say them again and again until maybe we get it. But the book that Spoke the Plant came out in 2018. I have changed quite a bit since then.
I can imagine.
I'm actually writing already like another book. It took me almost 10 years, but we're getting there. And I realized that I'm writing very differently because I had to accept some of those biases in me and then let them go. And one big one that I find that is at the moment driving my writing is precisely this idea of I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's happening. But this don't know is not like, I'm not intelligent enough, I'm not smart enough, I didn't read enough, I'm not educated enough, or whatever enough, I'm not good enough. It's not that. It's like, it's the most... I feel it's the most powerful place to be, to get a chance to know. And to know in the sense of, from his Latin root that is actually connected to taste. So to know something means to taste something. So if you want to know life, you need to have a taste for it. Literally, you have to eat it, which we do every day, especially with plants. So in a way, if we could taste our food, literally, so the plants that enter us every day and then make us every day physically, like the material building block of our bodies, if we could taste that with the awareness of like, wow, I'm being remade all the time by these others and they look so alien and yet they can create something that is so familiar, my body. I think our knowing would change in its form and it would become something much more almost contemplative. It wouldn't be so fixed on facts and what is and isn't, this black and white approach. It would realize like, oh, wow, I'm just a continuum of like, I'm an analog instead of this digital form of life, which of course right now it's particularly strong as a view. But so that would be the bias that, or the bias that I think would be the most useful, to acknowledge that we don't know anything, but we are here to taste life, so to know life, and that's the job. And the moment you think you know, then you have to dismantle it again, so that more life can enter you, more life can be tasted and known. So it's a constant undoing.
Well, that's a very mystical approach to working with plants versus traditional, to have that not knowing mind or the understanding of mystery and the unknown as a container that doesn't overwhelm but actually invites.
That's right. And it doesn't, that's the thing, is like for some people, I think it sounds more too hippie, too airy-fairy, too new age even. But I want to caution people that might think that is actually from this space, then you can apply whatever tools you have. Right. And science as a methodology offers, Western science as a methodology offer particular tools that can be applied when it's the right time. And so the same is valid and is true for other kind of sciences, like indigenous sciences have very specific tool that can be applied at a particular time for specific things. So it would be like, well, if you had to do surgery, do you need a hammer or a scalpel?
Right.
The good doctor knows what to use when. Sometimes you do need a hammer. Sometimes it's only a very fine job with a scalpel. And so I feel like having this space of openness, which this unknowing allow, then you have the freedom to choose which tool you're going to apply, instead of feeling that you can only and always apply the hammer or only and always apply the scalpel. Not true. We have so many. Why shouldn't we play with all of it that we have?
Right. Well, maybe to speak about something pretty specific, you describe an encounter you had with a Cecroba tree where you were taught that this tree can be used to help treat conditions of the human circulatory system.
Mm-hmm.
And on the back of this, we would normally ask, how can we use that tree as a resource to heal ourselves? That would be the question we're asking, or the investigation. But after learning this directly from the Cecroba, your questions were, how can the plants hold such knowledge about the functioning and healing of the human body, and why do they hold it? So I wonder if you could talk a bit about where these two questions have led you.
Mm-hmm. I still don't have the answers to those questions, and I like that because it allows me always to ask them. And I have asked them again and again. And more recently, I did a big project collaboration with a forest in the Dolomites in the north of Italy. And in that case, it was the same. It was like I approached exactly with those questions of like, I know you know. And I know you know more than I do. So first of all, am I allowed to be here and work with you as you forest, you trees? And the second question was, teach me, show me, instead of like, I know what I want to do. It was more like, what is it that you want to show? Because I know that you know. And what I got back at the time, at the beginning of the project, it was a very clear message, which made no sense whatsoever, because it often sounds like a riddle, and then it makes sense in, later. And the forest was like, you're very welcome to work with us. We are happy that you're here. But be aware that the story to be told is not what you think. And I was like, I thought was already going open enough not to think anything. But of course, we always have agendas. And we wanted to do an experiment on the perception of sound, different sounds, natural sounds in the forest, by the forest. And as we started that work, it became very clear that wasn't working at all. And so we're like, oh, God, what's happening? We had built this infrastructure. I was working with a few physicists and engineers, and they built this amazing infrastructure that allowed us to monitor the bioelectricity, so the biological activity as a summary in the form of electrical activity of the individual trees as well as their connection. So we were looking at the tree as individual as well as the forest, basically, like a collection of trees. And it just happened that while we were trialing all of our own questions of like, would they recognize the sound of this or that? And how would they share that information? And how that wasn't working. It just happened, and this is, again, a very common event in science. There's something that wasn't planned happen, and then it becomes the main thing that
Right.
you're doing. We had a solar eclipse passing on the site. And because we had all the infrastructure working, the infrastructure just kept recording and pushing out data of what was happening to the individual trees and then the trees as a collective. And so, we had plenty of data before, the baseline. We had the moment of the eclipse, and then we had time after the eclipse. And what we found is that very briefly, basically, as the eclipse approaches, all the trees in that little group changed significantly their bioelectrical behavior. And we could detect it. Like there was a big spike, something happened that was huge, and there was nothing. We were monitoring temperature, light, and all the usual stuff, and it was like there was nothing except that change started at all the trees, and then it got transferred to all the other trees. And by the time the solar eclipse arrived, all of the trees, which before that were doing their own individual thing, they were all synchronized. So their signatures were all the same. And so before the eclipse, you have the individual trees. During the eclipse, the trees are all synchronized like a flock of birds or a school of fish moving together, in this case, bioelectrically. And then when the eclipse passes, they all return to do their own individual thing. So this gave us the opportunity to see the individual trees as well as what we call the forest, like the collective. And how different components of that collective have different roles. They have different memories, because a solar eclipse is something that for humans seems a bit, these random events or rare events. They're actually not random and not that rare in the sense that they have their own cycles. And in this case, an eclipse like that would return every 18 years in the same place, more or less. Which means that if you're a tree that is older than 18 years, you've seen that before. And we suggested in the paper that the older trees start first because they had that experience several times before, and they recognize that something is coming. And they tell the younger trees who have not had that experience before to prepare. So then they all synchronize. And once the thing is passed, then everyone can return to do their own business. And when then we finished the study, that became the core of the work that we were doing. And I remember those words that were echoing in my mind of the beginning of the experiment, when the forest was like, yeah, but the story to be told is not what you think. It's almost like they already knew what they wanted to share, and they already knew what was coming, and somehow we were just there at the perfect time. And so they were able to show us. And this collective behavior, the long-term memory, collective behavior in a forest in response to something, that is relating our planet with the cosmos, because we're talking about moon, sun, and earth interacting. This is like big pattern that I think for our minds are kind of a bit too big to hold.
Wow. There are two big questions that arise after encountering your work. And, one is, how does a plant speak? And the second is, how can we hear its voice? And you write, the voice of the vegetal other is revealed in a place of reciprocity, which I really resonated with, because this notion that we may only hear the voices of plants, that their language may only be revealed to us once we are in right relationship with them, which you kind of just described, how being in the space of openness in your own self before you go into this forest in the Dolomites allowed something to be communicated to you before it happened. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how we can move towards this space of reciprocity with plants.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the first thing would be to, again, drop another expectation, which is, first is, at least in my experience, the communication with plants doesn't happen that you suddenly have this booming voice telling you things. So just in case people are expecting that, I never had that myself. Maybe some others do, but it's
it wasn't
more
a burning
of
bush moment.
No, no. But in my experience, that communication comes very clearly as I said, as a sensation, and sometimes as a well-formed thought that I know it's not mine. Because some of the content I would have no possibility to know about that. As you mentioned Sokoba before. I'm not a medical doctor. I had no idea. I didn't even know what tree that was when I was working with it. And it took me 10 years when I came back home after that experience, I looked for information on that tree and there was nothing. So I just thought, okay, I just have to accept that that's what happened.
Right.
Then I went back to start writing the book and I looked again for the information on this tree, then suddenly I started coming across more recent work that was on this tree in particular, and they were just showing scientifically how this tree is good for blood conditions. It cleans the blood. And I was like, oh, okay. But it took 10 years. So, again, dropping the expectations. And if this happens over and over again, you start also to build the trust that this other actually knows what he's saying. It knows what he's sharing with you. And it feels to me they're sharing the information that they know you specifically can hold and use for whatever it is that you're doing. So I think this building of trust is part of also that reciprocity that we are talking about. Because if you imagine human relationships, right? Reciprocity, it's built on trust, that you will not take advantage of me, that I'm giving you everything I can, and you wouldn't just take it and run, but it would be more like, oh, thank you, and I'll do the same. And so that trust builds, like in any relationship, over time, and it requires that we spend time with, literally, like in this case, even just in a garden or spending time in out in nature, whatever nature is. And I think that is the foundation of the reciprocity. Then the reciprocity is not something that you do. It's something that just emerges because the same way as when we love, we have a friend that we love or a loved one in general, we just want to be there for them. We just want to support them, and we are not expecting we're not doing it because we're expecting something back. We're doing it because we love them. So ultimately that turns into, I love plants. That's why I am in that relationship. And if we expand and extrapolate these to, as I said, nature, so all of the aspects of this planet and the planet itself, being in a relationship with this planet in a reciprocal way means that we love being here. We love this planet, and you do not destroy, mistreat, abuse what you love, because that's not love. And there is no trust in that. There is no reciprocity. So I think what then we are seeing now in the bigger picture, it's a deep lack of love on our part for the planet and for this place that we are in.
But the reciprocity you describe is not an individual one between you and a specific plant. I mean, it can be, but you described a forest that you hadn't probably spent a lot of time in, I'm imagining, communicating to you. So that reciprocity was not based on a relationship of trust between you and that forest. That relationship of trust was something that was greater than that particular form of a plant, be it a tree, be it a forest.
Yeah.
So it seems that, what you're describing is an intelligence that a forest or a plant or a tree is able to perceive that's greater than itself, that it knows that you have inside of you the openness to value what it has to say, which is very different than building trust between an individual human being, because you're basically saying if you build trust with an individual human being, then you suddenly have trust with the entire human race.
Yeah, I can see your point. I guess the individual relationship allows us to do the training of that muscle. And then then you can start extending it beyond, like we can train our loving capacity with our families, because those are the ones that are closest and maybe sometimes easiest to love. But then that muscle then can be applied, if it's strong enough, then can be applied in a more extended way, as you're pointing to. And then, yes, you, in theory, if you have enough training of that muscle, you should be able to love humanity as much as you love your son, your daughter.
But it seems like the plants are able to access your level of love, so to speak, quite directly.
Yeah, I think that and that's why you mentioned the term teacher before. I think in that sense they are amazing teachers, because it's almost the sensation that I get when I interact with them, especially when I'm having a hard time and I can't quite, I'm stuck in a very human space and I can't quite work out what to do. it seems they, as you so beautifully pointed out, it seems like they are very good at reminding us that what's inside us extends and transcends the human form. And they can remind us of that because that which extends and transcends the human form is the same that we are seeing in the plants. There is something in the plants or something everywhere in life, the life of it, that is transcending the form. And so it's almost like a mirror that is showing you like it doesn't matter what you look like, but if you look closely enough, deep enough, you will find that there is no difference. So your form transcends, and you can love this entire planet. You can love all forms, plants, humans, other animals, because you recognize in them something that it's you. But of course, I think we are all working to get a little bit more enlightened, and as we know, not very easy task. But fortunately, we have so many teachers around us that. Non-humans especially, that can help us.
But you're really talking about a universal spirit, whether that is considered love or in other mystical traditions, like in Taoism, might be, the way.
That's right.
And there are many names for this. In the Vedic traditions, they use, like prana, for instance, the life force that's within everything, and that's a language that is a universal language that allows you to both listen and then also speak to non-human forms of life.
I like that you're mentioning the Tao, the way, because I really love the fact that the way that can be spoken is not the way, because it really transcends. Again, there is this idea of you need to transcend the need of describing it and explaining it. And when you just feel, then you already know. Which returns to like to know is to taste. I can taste something and I don't need to describe it to you for me to know. And even if I describe it to you, until you taste it, you won't know. And so I guess there is this feeling of like something bigger than us, wider, more open, and in a way formless. And yet all the forms are here too. So, yeah, that's the paradox, right?
I mean, maybe to keep going with the more mystical, because to me there was a huge mystical thread in your book. Obviously it's grounded in a real scientific understanding, experiments, but there was a very mystical experience also that was present there, your own, but also from the plants. And you share a teaching that was given to you by the Cikoba and the sacred jungle tobacco. They communicated to you that wisdom is in the oxygen and the blood is the great connector. And you write that this state of communion with the whole is made manifest via your heart, which speaks a little bit to what you were just speaking about with love. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to that.
Whew. I think it's actually quite simple. And I use this word not that lightly, simple in the sense of we all are already all of that. And then for some funny game that we are playing, we seem to find it interesting to complicate things and to make up stuff and imagine new way and sometimes, especially at this time, we are doing this in a quite extreme way. It comes to mind, I was recently speaking to a friend who was telling me about the work of an Italian photographer who is now passed, and his name is Luigi Ghirri. And he was a really amazing photographer. And one of the things that he was talking about in a very prophetic way, in a way, was that, it was imagining how in the future we would occupy the image and leave no space for the landscape. And of course, as a photographer, what he was prophetically already pointing at the fact that, the selfie, now, as long as I fill up all the image, all the space, you don't even see where I am. And it's irrelevant. And then, as you know, there are even now tools where you can remove parts of the background that you don't like in the picture. And so it's almost like we are taking this desire of making things our way, so to an extreme that we are replacing the real world and those relationships with an image and a representation of that. An image made to our liking, a representation made through our own filters and our own conditioning and biases, to the point that we occupy literally the entire space. And it's a very dangerous place to be, as we can see the results in the world. And I guess what this connection with different aspects of nature beyond the human nature, which of course is also nature, are a reminder not to go too wild or too far away from ourselves when we are getting all caught up in our creations. Because we might get so self-obsessed that we forget about everything else. Literally, we delete the background. And so the landscape doesn't exist anymore. It's being replaced by these representations. And that's very dangerous because, of course, it makes us feel very lonely, very unhappy humans.
Yeah.
And then we go crazy, and I think this is what we're doing. We're going crazy. And but fortunately for us, we haven't deleted all of the landscape, and these others are loudly speaking, I think, to a lot of people, really. I receive a lot of messages of people saying, "Oh, me too. Oh, finally someone said it." And it's almost like we're all in the closet thinking like, I can't say that I'm talking to my plants or my dog or my chicken. And yet everyone is doing it. So it's almost like these others are slowly peeking into those pictures that we have occupied and say like, hey, we are also here. And in doing that, they are, in a way, dismantling a little bit this egoic image of ourselves, the representation of ourselves, but also reminding us that, hey, you're going to feel lonely. Don't be silly. Just come back and come back into the landscape a little bit, and we can be part of this together. And I think in that sense, then we reconnect those molecules, of oxygen and blood, and which are made, we share. They are all the same molecules that they keep remaking different forms. And so in that sense, they are connecting us. And but if we are holding our breath and trying to occupy the entire space, then it's not going to work.
No. There's another lesson that you described in the book that was given to you by tobacco that I think points to what you were just describing as well, which was on the importance of surrender, how we have no control over the circumstances we face until we surrender the need to control them. Because you're describing also control. When you fill the space with our own self-image, we're controlling it. And you suggest we are collectively ready to shed this way of being, that it is time to overthrow our conditioned seeing of a disobedient disruption, as I like that term, of the reality that has prevented us from seeing the innovative solutions that could bring planetary well-being and peace into being, which is a kind of phrase which you can very easily dismiss as New Age,
Absolutely.
platitude. But I don't think it is when you're describing it, especially from the context of where it comes from. So tell me more about this surrender, this space that you were shown.
Yeah. It's very far from being New Age in the sense that it's the people who know me, they know that I'm a very practical person. And so I get very frustrated when things remain too theoretical and, in the thought world. I love the exploration, but then I personally need to get back to earth and make it happen and materialize them here. So when I speak of that surrender, I don't say it metaphorically. I hardly ever speak metaphorically about these things. So in my case, my personal case, it was about 2 years ago now, I decided to leave academia because I realized that the work at hand that needed to be done to achieve this, or at least to move towards the goal that you mentioned, the tobacco, speaking of, required me to embody that myself in my own life. So it's like if the old system and the old structure doesn't fit you, then you need to walk away and walk on and create the new structure that does fit. And so I left academia, and I knew that meant no income, probably not able to pay my rent anymore. My car broke down, so no car. And there is no more surrender than feeling as if your basic needs as a human might not be met. Because it's very scary. And of course, I had plenty of panic attacks and anxiety at the start. But at the same time, there was a part of me that felt like this is the right direction. I'm not alone. And I've been nudged on. Now, 2 years on, as you can see, I'm not exactly like starving or like I'm, I don't look like I'm dying of anything because of that. And if anything, in that saying, okay, I am letting go and I'm doing it right here, then life responds with tenfold what is needed. And so somehow the vision that is moving me now, which is more of a global kind of project, it is based and is constantly asking me to surrender. And every time I want to like hold on a little bit or control things or get frustrated because I want things my way, which of course is normal, I'm totally human, things like suddenly stop. And I'm learning to feel that like, I just try to control things again. And so I literally have to, okay, just let it go again. And in that moment, immediately things start moving again. And, from the outside, it will look like magic. From the inside, sometimes does look like magic. It's like, whoa, how did this happen? But I'm getting used to this movement. Again, is the posture of like, okay, I actually don't need to control anything. When I do control, because I guess I'm a bit freaked out by not knowing what's happening, I'm being informed immediately that that's not how we operate. And so there is this constant feedback. And I feel, again, I have met a lot of people who are going through a similar process in their own lives. And this idea of like, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I've been nudged to go this way. And people say, yes, I'll go that way, even if I don't understand. I think that's a very powerful thing, and it's happening a lot. And I think so that change, the tobacco was inspiring. It's in progress. It's work in progress. And of course, it needs to somehow, how to say this, is almost like if it was screaming out loud, I'm doing this and this is how it works and look at that, it would risk to turn itself into exactly the structures that are not working for us anymore. So this is a more quiet and subtle work, very pragmatic, very grounded, very real, but at the same time, it doesn't need to advertise itself until it manifests. And then everyone will see and it'd be like, oh, and when did that happen? Oh, that looks good. Oh, I'll go that way too. And so hopefully it will inspire others who were kind of ready, considering, I need a change. Life like this is not sustainable. Life like this is not helping me, is not helping the planet. And we can't force people. Surrender is exactly the opposite. It's not force. So I guess we can only, at least this is what I'm learning. It's like, you want to change the world because you don't like as it is now. You just start walking the other way. Start walking the path that you think It's a different way of being here. And then don't worry about what's happening with that. If someone sees it and he feels inspired, great. If nobody cares, fine too. You just start walking. And so in that sense, again, there is a surrender of not expecting anything either, and not expecting anything beyond what it is that you are actually doing in that moment.
And did you move away from academia because you felt it was too rigid and you were unable to actually do the work you were being called to do by having to play by those rules?
Yeah, pretty much. And also, I think I really felt this wasn't like I had enough of you guys. I'm fed up and I'm going. That wasn't the attitude. It was actually very, oh wow, okay, this is finished. So it was quite peaceful, and I was like very. It was very clear, and I was quite at peace with the idea that, like, oh, okay, whatever I could have inputted in that system, I feel I did, and now it's time for me to move so that the rest of what it is that I'm supposed to do can happen. And it's ironical because I am in conversation with some universities to do part of the project that I've been developing for the last 2 years. And I find it funny that of all the people and of all the spaces, it would be academia that would come back and say like, oh, we would love to do that with you. And I was like, really? So we will see. I can't really talk about it in details because as I said, it's a very quiet, it's a very delicate baby that we are nurturing. And and I'm very excited because it's been teaching me so much about surrender and magic and awe and reverence.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was another, teaching or sharing from the tobacco plant, which I was perhaps most moved by from all, and there were so many teachings that were imparted to you that you described in your book through your experiences. And in this one, Tobacco spoke with you about his ability to heal humanity of its greatest pain, which he named as the pain of separation from God or the universe or a greater wholeness, whatever label one chooses, through remembrance, which I was very moved by because in my own mystical tradition, in Sufism, remembrance is the journey back to the recognition of that wholeness, whether you call it God or mystery or Allah. And Tobacco said, in each moment, humanity can open its eyes to close the rift that separates it from the whole by realizing that there is no rift at all. This realization heals the root cause of humanity's pain. I mean, when I read that, I was like, I could be reading from, Meister Eckhart or Buddha or Ibn Arabi or, the list of great saints and mystics go on that could be sharing that. And this came from a plant. Mm-hmm. And I find that very humbling because it perhaps turns on our head, so to speak, this notion of who imparts mystical wisdom of that level.
Yeah. And I have a suspicion that all of these people might have heard the same other speaking to them.
Sure.
And so,
they just didn't call it a plant.
That's
they just
right.
didn't call it a plant. They heard it as God or
whatever
not
else,
mind or the emptiness or their own divine nature. Yeah.
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 And but the interesting thing, returning to the experiment in the Dolomites, one thing that I didn't share, which is for me, I'm still digesting it. At the end of the experiment, the same way as at the beginning, I asked permission to be there. At the end of the experiment was before we left the site, right? I went for a walk, and I just wanted to thank this forest for allowing us to be there, to collaborate. This is a place that was quite badly devastated by a big storm a few years back. So there were a lot of areas of the forest that were like completely destroyed, annihilated, trees down, like lots of... So my human eyes were looking out, and when I wanted to say thank you for having us, what I was seeing was all this distraction, and I was like, oh, so much pain. And I started crying because of the pain that I was looking at. And then I had this voice, or this sense. It was a voice. It was a sense of the land herself. I mean, the Roman would have called it the genus loci, but it's the spirit that embodies that land, that place. And it was like, no need to cry, and everything is precisely as it's supposed to be. And then he shared a lot of things, and when I shared them back with a friend that was part of the team, he said to me, "Oh my God, Monica, do you know, I have a book of fairy tales, and that thing that you're saying, I read it in this book. I don't know the book." So we come back from the field, and he gives me the book of the fairy tales, and I look, and he's like, "Oh my God!" So the same words had been written there by someone before me. And when I go back to the area just a few months ago, I was there, and I asked around for do you know any fairy tale story that has this theme in there? And there is one story about an old, very old woman who knows everything that has been. And in the story, she tells, as part of what she's sharing with the humans, she's saying exactly the same words that the land gave me. So I know it sounds a bit crazy, but for me, what it feels is like someone else ages ago sat on this land, and this land shared the same message with them. At that time, they put it as a fairy tale. At this time, I'm writing it as a little song for my ukulele, which is what I did. But it's the same message. So there is someone that is very old, and in Australia, it would have the name of country. There is someone that is very old that also holds the knowledge and all the past that is always been. And he has this perspective that is so much broader and wider than the little one that we have as humans, because our lives are relatively short, that can see from that perspective. It's like, don't worry, we've been through this before. I've seen this before. You little human crying for something that you don't have to worry about. And in that sense, it gave me also a sense of wow, I'm connected with a past that is so deep that I can't even imagine it. So when we talk about ancestors, it's like, this is more than ancestors. This is like time itself as the ancestor. And then also hope, this feeling of she, as the earth, knows what she's doing. She's the great experimenter. She's done experiments before. And this is just another one of hers. And it just happened that we are seeing parts of it. But again, because we don't have the entire picture, we do not know what's going on. And we are trying to make sense of the little bits that we have. But in fact, what I learned from this forest was actually, no, the forest that I call forest was a plantation. It was a monoculture. And when this storm came, it cleared a monoculture, which is actually not a good thing to have in a place that is supposed to be much more biodiverse. And what has emerged from that disaster, suddenly these species of trees that nobody has planted, apparently, started to emerge. And when I spoke to the rangers, they were like, we have all of these trees coming up, and they are the perfect species to be here, especially in view of the climate changing. And I'm like, yeah, because she's done it before and she knows what's going on. And so it gave me this sense of empowerment, really, because often in the face of, this big changing climate and disaster at the environmental planetary level, I think a lot of us feel hopelessness and grief. And instead it gave me oh, wow, okay, so there is someone bigger than me, much, much bigger than me, that got that. I got it. And it feels good.
Monica, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for the beautiful questions and for allowing me to splurge around all of these themes. Yeah.
Splurge away.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Emergence magazine is an initiative of Calliopeia Foundation. Our original essays, in-depth interviews, films, and rich multimedia explore the threads connecting ecology, culture, and spirituality. Our theme music is composed by Logan Stalley and H. Scott Salinas. This podcast is edited by Erica Neiginger and produced by Shauna Quinn and Emmanuel Vaughn Lee, with writing by Lucy Warmald. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever podcasts are found. To subscribe to our newsletter, order our new print edition, and check out more of our stories. Visit emergencemagazine.org.